Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
False Claims Act lawsuits are on the rise. The Justice Department launched 500 of them in the last year, more than it has in decades. What's going on, and what should contractors be concerned with? Procurement attorney Barbara Konoski of the Center Law Group joins me in studio. Barbara, good to have you back.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate you having me.
And you have been really tracking this. What is the phenomenon? Give us the scope of what's going on.
Well, it got everybody's attention when the FBI raided Karasoff recently and locked out the employees, took their hard drives, computers, and walked out the door, commenting briefly that they were the subject of 2 criminal subpoenas and 1 civil subpoena.
And False Claims Act actions by the government against a contractor are generally civil, correct?
Correct.
So why would they have a criminal one going on?
Well, that's because they must really have something that we don't know about yet, because the standard on a criminal subpoena is beyond a reasonable doubt. A civil subpoena has a lower standard, a preponderance of the evidence. So it's very interesting and very telling that there's 2 criminal subpoenas and 1 civil subpoena.
Right, because the way the False Claims Act works in practice, generally, it's almost impossible for large contractors not to get hit with the occasional claim just because of the complexity of their markets and the number of transactions going on in the government. Somebody somewhere can find, whoops, you overcharged on this hourly rate or for this particular license.
That's absolutely correct. You are spot on. And what we have found in our practice is a lot of GSA and VA schedule contractors get trapped in discounting practices, and it's really easy for GSA to find that. A lot of them are confused. They think that subcontracting to a federal prime that is selling their services or products to the federal government is the same as selling directly to the government. That's not true. If you discount to a prime contractor, that's a totally different situation and can lead to investigations on discounting practices.
Right. So if it's criminal, if something comes at you from a criminal standpoint, it's because the government suspects you of deliberately and sort of systematically trying to evade the law.
Right. And I think I've heard bribery mentioned, corruption, conspiracy, things like that. And that's the issues that rise to a criminal subpoena.
But on the other hand, the Justice Department tends to throw the basket at people of everything they can think of and then pare down charges as it proceeds.
That is absolutely right. You notice that in a lot of these, when they're not under seal, you'll see that they throw everything at the contractor, resolve some of them. And that's very similar to a bid protest where, as attorneys, we throw everything on the bid protest, and then eventually it may come down to 1 issue.
And this 500 number that they filed, as you've put in your blog, it's more than they have done since the late 1980s. What's going on? Are contractors simply doing more wrongdoing, or is there something going on in justice that they decided, hey, let's go after these companies?
Well, there was some type of investigation on who DOJ was targeting, and I believe it was congressionally initiated on what DOJ was focusing on, and it was some of the easier low-lying ones on medical, where there were bundling services that weren't necessary. You came in for a flu shot, and they gave you a physical exam, too, and bundled it with the flu shot, things like that, which were much easier to do. And looking at the history of DOJ, those were relatively easy for them, and they get the press release.
These are in the Medicare, Medicaid,
correct,
and VA type of area?
Yes, where they're charging the government, bundling services, overcharging, things like that. I saw one where a person was charged for 2 surgeries and only had 1. So you can only remove 1 pancreas or something like that. But anyway, you can't do it the second time. So
right. Yes, kidneys maybe, but not, you only got 1 pancreas.
Exactly. Kidneys, yes, a different issue.
Does that mean then that the number of cases of false claims in pricing and transactions in government contracting is not on the rise so much?
Oh, they're definitely on the rise. A 54% increase from the previous year, which is huge. And they're focusing now on things like small business certifications, or is a lot in the service-disabled veteran area. Is a service-disabled veteran actually running the company? Is it a front for somebody else? Also on false billing, as you mentioned earlier. There's been just a surge in these types of cases of looking at federal contractors. And what I find is really interesting is the 500 you mentioned are what they call self-initiated cases that DOJ has initiated, are not whistleblower cases.
Right, because the whistleblower cases, that's another whole kettle of fish, and that's on the rise, too.
That is absolutely correct, particularly in DOD contracts. And I'm expecting now, with all the issues in cyber and certification, CMMC compliance, and those types of issues, that we're going to see more whistleblowers coming forward, particularly on things dealing with technology.
Sure. We're speaking with Barbara Konoski. She's a partner at the Center Law Group. And what's your best advice for contractors to stay clear of all this? I mean, don't do false claiming, but sometimes you almost can't help it given the complexity of the procurement regulations and the market you're operating in.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's a difficult market to maneuver. If you're just starting out, it's difficult to figure out all the rules, particularly of schedules contracting, which are particularly complex, and how to avoid DOJ. But definitely have a compliance program. And what I tell clients is that it doesn't have to be extensive. It just has to be something. Make it right-sized for your company, because a compliance program, if you have 100 employees, is going to be different than a compliance program if you have 1 million employees.
Sure, and also having a compliance program might be able to show the government that you were acting in good faith, even though you made a mistake, and that would keep it in the civil area.
Oh, absolutely correct. And I think it's going to be particularly difficult for contractors because there's a new civil cyber fraud initiative that DOJ launched in 2021, and that continues to grow in prominence. In 2023, DOJ settled multiple cases involving cybersecurity failures by contractors. So you're going to see more and more of that. And
sounds like, and I know you're an attorney that represents companies, but it's probably not smart to represent yourself once DOJ shows up.
Oh, absolutely not. That is a very, very bad idea. And I'm not just saying this because I'm an attorney, but anytime you may have to go to court, and that may go for other things too, I would highly recommend getting an attorney. And also because you want to make sure that the subpoena is, I'm going to use the words again, right-sized. I use that for compliance programs. But right-sized, the government will tend to ask for everything. And when you have an attorney involved, you can narrow down somewhat the scope of the subpoena, and you can also possibly narrow down how much you have to produce at any given time. Because if they come in, and they often will, provide me every email for the last 10 years, that's a lot of, that's a big, you're trying to run the company to pay your legal fees for complying with the subpoena. So you want to try and schedule that in different tranches. And you want to show basically that you are complying, because the worst thing is to try and fight it.
Right. Do you think this might scare or just prevent some companies from otherwise coming into the federal market? Because who needs this chorus?
Well, that I don't mean to pivot back to Carasoft, but they are a reseller. And that's why a lot of companies try to get on somebody else's contract to, for instance, Microsoft has announced that they are no longer going to be a reseller. They're going to do direct sales with the government, which is a huge pivot from them. But they, in the past, were selling off other schedules or other contracts just so they didn't have to directly interface with the government.
So now they'll have to deal directly with licensing issues.
Correct. Absolutely. I like that.
Barbara Konoski is a partner at the Center Law Group. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much again for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And we'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.